Right. Hi, guys. This is the second episode of our podcast, Into the Oasis, hosted by Into the Oasis. I'm Zoe Cross.
I'm Riley Nelson. I'm Gemma Caddenaro.
And today we're here with Dr. Thomas Guarrieri. Dr. Guarrieri, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your research focus?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be on the podcast. So a little bit about my background's in political science. So I usually take those sorts of frameworks for understanding terrorism, counterterrorism, insurgency, counterinsurgency, some of the topics that I primarily study. So I basically am trained in quantitative methods. So a lot of my research focuses on quantitative methodologies. I do a little bit of qualitative research as well because I think mixed methods approaches are important for kind of understanding the types of topics that I focus on. But I'm mostly on the quantitative end, trying to understand things from the statistical side of any sort of given phenomena. So my background, I have a PhD in political science from University of Missouri. My background also includes a BA from Rutgers University in philosophy and political science. And I've been at the University of Maryland now for going on 8 years. So I've been here for longer time than I would have foreseen, but I really love it here and I love the university. I love the teaching and the research. And I've been working at START on a lot of research projects, and recently I've transitioned over to mostly focusing on teaching. As the director of undergraduate studies for the Global Terrorism Studies minor program, and also the director of graduate studies for the master's program that we have at START, and also graduate certificate programs that we have, which are really great. We have one on insider threat mitigation that my colleague, Dr. Steve Sin, manages. And we have another graduate certificate on terrorism analysis, which is actually really great for anyone who's interested in trying to complement what they're doing in their professional careers, who might be focused on counterterrorism, trying to understand more of an analytical perspective and some of the statistical methods that we use in the research world that might be translatable over to practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've taken, 3 classes with you now?
Yeah, probably a few.
I've had Dr. Guerrieri for so many classes, and then also going abroad as well. And I think, Gemma, you've had him for classes as well.
Yeah, we had our class together.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the differences between COIN and CT and explain what those are to our listeners, and then also how academic research has kind of helped us to understand these two?
Yeah, of course. So some of my research focuses, actually the topics are counterterrorism, counterinsurgency. I also focus on chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, what's largely referred to as CBRN, or CBRNE if you add explosives and E at the end of that. CBRNE attacks, so that's kind of where my focus is. So focusing on the counterterrorism, counterinsurgency differences. There's a lot of interesting research that has been published that looks at some of the differences between what's referred to as COIN, which is counterinsurgency, and CT, which is counterterrorism. And the reason that there are differences is because insurgency is different from terrorism. So we can think of terrorism, I think a good way to start this is to think of terrorism as both a strategy and a tactic that groups can utilize. So, and a group can use a terrorist campaign as a strategy. We can think of strategy kind of as an overall plan, if you will, for achieving some sort of long-term objective or long-term goal. Whereas individual terrorist attacks or the utilization of terrorism is really a method, which is also a tactic, right? You could think of tactic as kind of like a method that fulfills the overall strategy. The use of terrorism is a tactic that fits under the strategy of running a terrorist campaign. And that's something that groups can employ in the furtherance of an insurgency. And we can think of insurgency as, either an uprising or revolt or rebellion against a government.
Right.
So insurgent groups have a little bit of a different focus than terrorist organizations, but insurgent groups can use terrorism as a tactic to try to further their overall insurgency. So Bruce Hoffman has done a lot of really great research on this and kind of looking at the differences between terrorism and insurgency and kind of what the differences are. One of the most, I think, relevant differences between them that a lot of scholars point to is that insurgents aim at controlling territory. They want to control a physical area, where that might not be the case with a terrorist group. Terrorist groups have a lot of goals they want to achieve, but sometimes terrorist groups are focused on trying to achieve goals that are not focused on territory. They're trying to either coerce a population into supporting a certain ideology. They might even have other worldly goals, right? So we've seen terrorist organizations who have focused on trying to implement their religious beliefs. One group that comes to mind is the group Om Shirinkyo. Sure, we talked about Om Shirinkyo multiple times. So the group Om Shirinkyo that existed in Japan in the early 1990s, their leader Shoko Asahara really viewed himself as this sort of religious godlike figure, and his followers thought that was the case. And they had all of these apocalyptic sort of visions of using terrorism to usher in the end times or bring about the apocalypse. That's not about controlling territory.
Right, it's ideology.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So there are some differences there. And when you look at the difference between coin and insurgency, sometimes the same military strategy might have different effects, whether or not your goal is to try to combat an insurgency or your goal might be to combat terrorism. So I'll give one example of that. This is some research from Michael Boyle that looks at this difference. Let's take targeted strikes as an example here. So let's say that your goal is counterterrorism. You just want to degrade an organization to the point where they can no longer conduct terrorist attacks. Well, a targeted strike, we talked about this today, probably actually, a targeted strike might be really effective in disrupting a terrorist operation because the goal is just to use a drone strike, for example. Let's say the United States is conducting drone strikes against a group like the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria circa 2015, 2016. The goal might just be to disrupt that organization's ability to conduct terrorism. And that could be really effective. But when you're talking about insurgency and then control of territory, one of the important factors that insurgent groups consider is whether or not the local population they have the support, I should say, of the local population. So they want to maintain the support of the local population. The insurgency is basically based on trying to maintain that support because they want to have sovereignty over a given area. Well, what happens if your drone strikes that might be really effective at degrading a terrorist group in the ability for that group to conduct terrorist attacks angers the local population and makes the local population hate, in this case, the United States, and then they therefore side with a group like the Islamic State group because they're thinking to themselves, well, we don't like the fact that the United States has these drones overhead that they're able to strike and possibly harm civilians, right? And because of that, we really hate the United States, so we're just going to side with the Islamic State group. Well, that could undercut counterinsurgency because part of counterinsurgency is trying to persuade the local population to not side with the insurgents, but side instead with either the government that, in this case, the United States is supporting, or the counterinsurgent military, the military that's conducting the counterinsurgent operations. So these are offsetting effects. What could be really effective for counterterrorism might undercut counterinsurgency. So there are some differences there between COIN and CT that I think a lot of policymakers and practitioners have to really consider when thinking about this.